Hey, Harvest Kids, it's Mr. Carlos and Eddie. Hey, everybody! Well, we're here with this week's Bible story. And Eddie, why don't you tell the boys and girls what this week's Bible story is called? You got it, Mr. Carlos. Well, boys and girls, this week's Bible story is called God's Promise to Abraham. Nice job, Eddie. Well, with that, let's get ready for the story. Okay, Harvest Kids. Well, this week's story is from the book of Genesis, chapters 12 and 13. Eddie, take it away. You got it, Mr. Carlos. Now that the people of Babel could no longer talk with each other, they spread out over the whole earth. Different nations were formed, each with its own language. Terah, a man whose great way back grandfather was Noah's son Shem, settled with his family in a place called Haran. Terah had a son named Abram. Abram lived in Haran with his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot. One day the Lord spoke to Abram to take his family and leave. God said, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing." And that's from the book of Genesis, chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Thank you, Mr. Carlos. You got it, Eddie. God told Abram he would use him to bless all the families of the earth. Even though Abram didn't know where God was sending him, he trusted God's words to him. So when he was 75 years old, Abram moved away from Haran with Sarai, Lot, their servants, and everything they owned. Remember, outside his own country, Abram wouldn't have understood the languages of people he would meet, but God gave Abraham faith to obey. Wow, Mr. Carlos. I've never thought about that before. Me neither, Eddie. That's very true. He wouldn't have been able to communicate with anyone. That would have made it even more tough. You're not kidding. God was about to start his plan to rescue people from the curse that came when Adam and Eve first sinned. Along the way, Abram sinned too, but God didn't leave Abram. When Abram passed through a land called Canaan, the Lord appeared to him and promised to give the land to Abram and his children. Abram built an altar to the Lord and then continued on his journey. When he arrived safely in Bethel, he built another altar to the Lord. After a great famine forced Abram to move to Egypt, he returned to Bethel to live. In all their travels, the Lord blessed Abram and Lot. Their flocks of animals grew and grew until they filled the land. After a while, there wasn't enough room for Abram and Lot to stay together. Each of their flocks needed so much land for food and water, even their shepherds began to argue. When Abram saw that they were running out of space, he asked Lot to choose where he wanted to live. If Lot wanted to go to the left, Abraham would go to the right. Lot chose to live in a beautiful valley with lots of grass, rivers, and streams. With his family and herds, Lot traveled away from Abram. He went to the cities of the valley and pitched his tent near the city called Sodom. After Lot left, the Lord spoke to Abram and said, "Lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward, for all the land that you see. I will give to you and your offspring forever. And that's from the book of Genesis, chapter 13, verses 14 and 15. God told Abram he would have so many children and grandchildren that they could not be counted, just like the specks of dust on the earth can't be counted. Lot chose the best piece of land, but Abram received the promise of God. Through Abram, we have all been blessed, just as God promised, because it is by the death and resurrection of his great far-off grandson, Jesus, that all those who believe inherit the promise of Abram forever. Wow, Mr. Carlos, I love this story. Me too, Eddie. So do I. Well, boys and girls, that does it for this week's story. But as always, before we let you go, we have a few questions for you. Okay, boys and girls, here's the first question. What is Lot looking at, and what is Abram looking at? That's right. Lot is looking at the land with beautiful plains and rivers and lush, fertile ground. And Abram is looking at the countryside. Next question, boys and girls. Would you rather live in a town or in the country? How about you, Mr. Carlos? Where would you rather live? Well, Eddie, that's a great question. Sometimes I love to go to the country or to the mountains to get away from the city, but I don't know how long I'd survive in the country without a supermarket nearby. You're not kidding, Mr. Carlos. You're definitely not a country boy. Yeah, you're no kidding, Eddie. Okay, boys and girls, last question. What did God give Abram that was better than living in town? That's right. God not only promised him the land, but God promised Abram that he would have so many descendants that they would be impossible to count. Nice job, Eddie. Thank you, Mr. Carlos. Well, boys and girls, that does it for this week's Bible story. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something today. And thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you again next week. And until then, you are loved.